Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This is Tim, and today we have another awesome topic for you. Would you guys believe that the ATF director would issue a contradictory statement, back-to-back sentences? I know I wouldn't believe it, and I know this guy wouldn't either, but we're going to get into that right now. As you guys know, or you are new, this is Second Legacy. Second Legacy is a new channel between me and this guy right over here, me from Langley Outdoors and Tim from Military Arms Channel. We are building this bad boy, and we would love your help. Please hit that subscribe button, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, and that would be an incredible help, and thank you so much in advance. But today, before we dive into anything, because there is a new ATF, Steve Dettleback, the director, came out with some quotes on ABC. I'm going to show you something to set the standard for this, okay? As we go into this, what I'm showing, and everything is linked right down below, this is the reported violent crime rate in the United States from 1990 to 2021. That is a traumatic decline. As you see it going down, keep that in mind, we're at the very end of that. Now, with that, let me dive into the article we're going to hit and listen to this setup on the title, because you guys know how I love to do this. And Mr. Producer, would you hit number 2 for me? ATF Director Steve Dettleback talks about enforcing gun laws amid surge and mass situations. We're going to hit that in 1 second, but I've got to show you something else that's really important, and I'm going to throw it to Tim in a second to get his take, and then we're going to show you the contradictory statements. Quote, mass shootings have hit a record pace so far this year, with 49 in January alone, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Now, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Well, really 1 question, 1 statement. Do you guys remember 49 instances? Because I certainly don't. So that must mean we're going and leaning into a definition issue. And then also, you guys know that gun violence, from my channel, we talk about it all the time, Gun Violence Archive is backed by Slate Magazine, which is a leftist source. We're going to get into that in 1 second, but before we dive into the actual statements, Tim, that was a long intro. What do you think? Let's set it up, and then we're going to get into it.
Okay, so let's address the whole issue of what a mass shooting is, because there doesn't seem to be any real consensus as to what the definition of a mass shooting is. And I've spent quite a bit of time online researching this and looking at different opinions, and that's basically what we have, are just numbers of different varying opinions. But whose opinion matters the most? Well, let's take a look at an article from Britannica. Britannica is a solid source, in my opinion. The Encyclopedia Britannica is something that, even when I was a kid, was considered something like just irrefutable source of information. If you could bring up number 7, Mr. Producer, let's take a look at the Britannica website and how they define a mass shooting. So a mass shooting, also called an active shooter incident. So now they're marrying these two phrases. In my mind, I don't necessarily think they're one and the same, but apparently Britannica does. So we have a mass shooting and active shooter being kind of combined, and as defined by the US FBI, they define it, the FBI, as an event in which one or more individuals are actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Implicit in this definition is the shooter's use of a firearm. But of course, can't have any mass killings with a knife. That never happens. The FBI has not set a minimum number of casualties to qualify an event as a mass shooting, but the U.S. statute, so we have a statute, apparently the FBI doesn't agree with or has decided not to use, which is the Investigative Assistance for Violent Crimes Act of 2012. Now, this defines a mass killing as 3 or more killings in a single incident. For the purposes of this article, both sets of criteria will be applied to the term mass shooting, with the distinction that the shooter or shooters are not included in any fatality statistics themselves. So you always want to take out the shooter themselves, because many times they either die by their own hand or by law enforcement or a good Samaritan. So here we have this concept of the lead of this article, which says right in the very title of the article, ATF Director, talks about enforcing gun laws amid surge in mass shootings. And what is the implication in that statement? Mass shootings are on the rise. And if mass shootings are on the rise, violent crime is on the rise. More people are dying. More people are being gunned down by AR-15s. Oh my gosh, this is an epidemic. We have to do something tomorrow to stop this. Mr. Producer, just please entertain me and bring up slide number 1 more time, because this is the reality. We have seen a downward trend since the 1990s to present of violence in America. And this includes these 49 mass shootings of 2023. Well, actually, this doesn't because it stops at 21. But what you're going to see, even when they release the 23 statistics, is that the trend is going to be about the same baseline here. It's either going to be a little bit up or a little bit down. But if you take a look at 2020 in this, so 19, we see an uptick in 2020. What happened in 2020? Well, we had a lot of lawlessness in 2020. We had lockdowns and all sorts of craziness. Crime was going rampant. We had the defund the police movement. We had activist DAs releasing criminals. We had activist judges releasing criminals. We had Hollywood elites bailing out criminals. And so crime had gone up. It had ticked up in 2020. But in 2021, we start to see it slowly ticking back down. But yet here they are using that phrase, mass killings, mass shootings, and they're doing this for shock value. And there seems to be, once again, no consensus on what actually defines one of these events.
Correct. And the reason that we laid it out this way is because the things that I'm about to show you, it's a perfect segue from what Tim just said. This is shock value. Listen to the question. Mr. Producer, I'll even show it for you guys. Could you throw up number 4, please, while I read it? So here's the question, and the answer is where the inconsistency begins. Davis is the interviewer. What is the overarching issue? Is it just that we have too many guns already? Because when you look at other countries, they just don't have this problem. And so what are they doing better or we're not doing enough of? So this is what we would call a leading question. They are asking for a gun control question just in the way the question is framed. You could easily ask the same question of going, hey, what's going on? How do we fix it? But you didn't. You led with there's too many guns, blah, 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 all these talking points. So now listen to what Dettleback said, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dissect this because this is fascinating, particularly in light of everything going on right now with the ATF. Listen, and I quote, Mr. Producer, this is number 5. Dettleback's response to that question. Look, it's obviously a discussion that is happening all over the country. The president has talked a lot about it. The attorney general has talked a lot about it, and others have opinions. But at ATF, our job is to take the rules and laws that Congress has passed, the tools that we have, and to do everything in our power to enforce them to protect the community. Look, everything we do with the ATF begins and ends with public safety, and so there's a lot that has gone on. There's a lot more that needs to happen. Now, Tim and I are going to dissect that asunder in a second, but I've got to show you the contradictory statement, the next paragraph. Mr. Producer, number 6, and then we're going to go to town on this bad boy. So, for instance, still Dettleback, in August, in order to make sure we're implementing the Gun Control Act, he's referring to the Gun Control Act of 1968, a law that's been on the books for many, many years, we passed a rule that said that privately made firearms or ghost guns, which are unserialized, untraceable firearms, but they shoot and they can kill if they're misused, just like other guns, are subject to the same provisions as traditional firearms under the Gun Control Act. So, what I just showed you was a leading question by an ABC reporter. Then Steve Dettleback says, well, it's our job to fulfill the law requirements passed by Congress, which actually is their job. And in the next sentence, he says, well, so we clearly redefined a lot of things and made the rules kind of twist how we wanted to them. So now privately made firearms are now considered considered a firearm under the same rules, even though they are not. I mean, from a perspective, Tim, this blows my mind. Like,
I know.
Literally, this guy just said, it's our rule. It's our job to follow Congress's rules, and then turns around and goes, but we do what we want. Look what we did.
Well, see, he's confusing two separate things. He's making rules and laws out to be the same thing, right? And that's what ATF is technically doing right now. And he said it himself. He admitted to what they're doing. We passed a rule that said that privately made firearms are ghost guns. They passed a rule. Well, who elected you to pass anything? It's not your job. That's what we call an end run around Congress. Congress passes laws, not rules, laws, and then they hand it down to the bureaucracies like the ATF to enforce those laws. Now, there is this issue of Chevron deference, which allows the agencies, if there's any ambiguity in the law, that they can read into it as they will and come up with their interpretation, but this can be challenged in the courts, right? So, but saying that we passed a rule that basically redefined the Gun Control Act of 1968, which was a law passed by Congress, that's basically saying, yeah, man, we just, we come to work and we decide we want to make the community safer, so we're just going to ban AR-15s through a rule change because we passed it. I'm not saying that's what they've done. I'm just giving that as an example, right?
No, of course. Or ghost guns, bump stocks, triggers,
braces.
What's that one? Braces.
Yeah.
So what
accessories of any type?
Oh my gosh, yes. What we're seeing is literally the director of the ATF just said it's their job to enforce rules passed by Congress. And then the next sentence says we passed rules, so therefore they are now laws. That's exactly what the sitting director of the ATF just said on national television on ABC. If you are a GOA lawyer, if you work for any organizations, if you are a lawyer of any kind, FPC, you name the group. If you can't do something with that, I don't know. I mean, Tim, like, am I imagining? Like, that seems like they literally just sold the case against themselves.
Yeah, they did. They completely incriminated themselves as to what they're doing. And I would hope that GOA and FPC and everybody else takes a look at this and goes, oh my goodness, but we're going to have to forward them this article so they can see this public statement. Because,
or you guys can share this video.
Yeah, and you guys can share this video and you guys can send it to them. It is absolutely mind-blowing to me that he basically said the quiet part out loud once again. And it's just, where does this end? Because we've already had the SCOTUS slap the EPA for doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, and this is a discussion I had this morning, gun counter banter, a discussion I had this morning was, yes, the Supreme Court can strike down whatever the EPA is doing, and it should apply to the ATF, FCC, FAA, and all the other alphabet agencies, but it generally doesn't, because we're going to have to drag each of them individually into court for their infractions and their violations of constitutional rule. And so even though it should stand that what the Supreme Court has said regarding the use of Chevron deference by the EPA should apply to ATF, it's not going to work that way. We're going to have to drag ATF into court and get the same ruling against the ATF. But here's another problem that I see with this. So when an agency like the EPA, ATF, FCC, FAA, pick your alphabet agency, when they don't follow the courts, what's the solution? Mm-hmm. Does the Supreme Court have an enforcement branch that goes out and says, "Hey, you're fired. We're yanking your card and you're going home now. You don't work here anymore." Where's the accountability? Because these agencies routinely defy law. They routinely defy court orders. They do as they please. Sure, Congress can hold hearings, but Congress can't put anybody in prison. They can refer people for criminal inquiry and get a special counsel. But do you really think that's going to happen? It's They'll hold a couple hearings, they'll make a little bit of noise, and that's all political posturing, and then they'll move on to the next topic of the day. Yep. And so there's no accountability, and that's the part that drives me nuts the most, is the fact that we can't hold these agencies accountable for their actions.
Right. And so just for notes, guys, what Tim is referencing is a pretty important Supreme Court decision that came out at the exact same time as the abortion Dobbs decision and the Bruen case. I mean, it was like literally the 3 days in a row where they went 1, 2, 3. And that case is called West Virginia versus EPA. Now, in that case, the Supreme Court verbatim said you cannot use executive bureaucracies to reinterpret existing laws. You cannot redefine things to make laws more effective to fit in the criteria that you're chasing. Now, that is not a direct quote, but you can check it, and that is a very high-level paraphrase. But that was the end result. They slapped the EPA for trying to change carbon dioxide into a toxin just through a definition change. Now, a lot of you out there are probably thinking that is exactly what the ATF has just done. Another bureaucracy, another entity below the executive branch in that entire chain. The big problem that we have is bureaucracies are running the hen house. And to Tim's point, what is the recourse for that? Because, you hear things. Matt Gaetz put out a bill that said abolish the ATF. Okay, well, is that really the most realistic immediate response? Some other people are saying defund the ATF. Some people are saying, hey, issue oh my gosh, what did Dan Crenshaw's bill say? They could it's some sort of recourse. It was like a complaint or a challenge or an appeal. It was an appeal to the ATF. Yeah. But what's the response? I mean, in my opinion, if you're looking at the bureaucracies and the overreach through the executive branch or of the executive office through these bureaucracies, that's the problem. To your point, this is not necessarily just a gun rights thing, not just a First Amendment thing, not just an EPA thing. This is the overreaching of the bureaucracies.
And
they are in running around Congress. Please
they
go.
are. And how we remedy this is actually quite simple, and it will take an act of Congress. But this is something that we need to push for. And what is that? We need to put, well, and it may take the Supreme Court, but the courts don't want to deal with the issue. And the issue is Chevron deference, right? They don't want to deal with it. The Supreme Court is kind of waiting for that perfect case. A lot of, various activist groups and things like that are waiting for that perfect case to either support or, not support the use of Chevron deference. But what we need to do is take that away from these agencies. We cannot let them go in with a broad brush and just reinterpret law, basically rewrite law. And on top of that, break law by assigning criminal penalties to their rule changes. Rules are not laws, folks. Right. The ATF by law is not supposed to be able to go in and say, oh, we've passed a rule, which is exactly what he said in the article, and 100%. Then we're going to assign a 10-year penalty to it if you don't follow our rule that the Congress had nothing to do with. All of this is in violation of existing law. But here we are.
100%. And if you guys want to absolutely see some of the craziest arguments that you've ever seen on this planet, you look at some of the ATF arguments for gun control in the Texas machining case and some of the other cases that they've gone for. They've actually utilized historical prejudices as precedent for their reason that they can control guns. I am not making this up, and we will do a video on it at some point, I'm sure. But they've literally stated that in court documents. One of them was they discriminated against Catholics, and then one was Native Americans because that's clearly a precedent. It's history and tradition. They were trying to satisfy Bruin. It's like, is anyone watching this? Like, did they just say that? And that's the crazy part is they're going down these roads, and it's perfectly fine as long as they get their way. It doesn't matter what they say. It's insane.
Yep, it is insane. Oh. And that's why we really need to urge our politicians to look at this. To look at the issue of Chevron deference. And really, this should be a bipartisan issue because Chevron deference doesn't just affect the Second Amendment community. Obviously, It was affecting the EPA. It would affect all of the bureaucracies. No matter what your political stance is, the abuse of Chevron deference is something that should be of concern to you. And we can fix this through political means. We have the tools at our disposal. Our founding fathers gave us those tools. But what that requires is for you watching the video and people that you know is for you to become politically active. We can't do anything if we just sit back and complain. We have to become political activists ourselves. That is part of the process. That's how our republic was structured. It was to put the power of government in the hands of the people. But to exercise that power, you must become politically active. If you just sit back and let this stuff happen, it gets progressively worse. And then 20 years from now, we're sitting around going, man, how did that happen? I didn't see this coming. It's because you were asleep. We want to wake you guys up. Not that everybody watching this is asleep, but the point is we really, really need to focus on not just narrowly focusing on two-way issues. We have other things we need to tackle within our community and as Americans as a whole. And that one big issue, in my opinion, is the issue of Chevron deference. What do you think, Braden?
Oh, 100%. Now, you nail it. Like, that is a perfect summation of where we're at because this transcends any one right. Like, as Tim said, and it's kind of a Southern colloquialism, this screen door goes both ways. It's not just against the Second Amendment or abortion rights or whatever is important to you. This bad boy, you are empowering a bureaucratic state, which is not directly answerable to the voters, more power than those that are directly answerable to the voters through the voting booth. This is something that is kind of you said it really well. It's an in run and it's a workaround, but I think that's an amazing way to end this bad boy. And thank you guys so much for watching. Tim, thank you so much for your time. We are going to go on to the next video, but we will see you guys on the next one. See you later.